Good morning, everyone, including Neil's here. Great. Welcome, Neil. Neil Mackay. Got some councillors here. We've got quite a few sick this week. And so we've got some that might be coming in online, but as always, encouraged to just rest up if you're not feeling well. So, and also no need to keep your cameras on for this one if you just want to chill out on Zoom. So just pop up if you feel like asking a question or contributing. And for those at home, all the best with your recoveries. And I'll pass over to staff for the briefing. Thanks.
Morena, thanks for the opportunity to come and talk about the Regional Infrastructure Fund. So this is, I suppose, the first of a series of discussions that we'll be having about the Infrastructure Fund. Really keen to make sure that we have a good interactive process about the opportunities and how best to structure those in terms of discussions with other partners and stakeholders in the community. Apologies for Chris, she's another one that's away sick today, so so she would be here if she was better. We've also asked we've also asked Neil Mackay from the Economic Development Kotahitanga Board to join us as well. The EDKB is part of the process around the RIF, and so keen to talk through that as well. In terms of this,
So RIF is Regional Infrastructure Fund, which is the subject of our briefing today.
yes,
Yeah,
sorry,
thanks.
already using the jargon already. So I suppose today we're keen just to talk about actually what is the Regional Infrastructure Fund, some of the decision-making process, who's eligible for the fund, and what types of projects can be included for that, the Kapiti Growth Summit, and then sort of proposed next steps. Keen to take questions at the end, have a chance to go through the slides, and then sort of answer questions as a whole. In terms of what is the Regional Infrastructure Fund, so it's commonly referred to as RIF. It's a $1.2 billion fund, and it's part of the Coalition's government's commitment to investing and improving regional infrastructure. It's focused on improving or boosting the New Zealand economy, increasing regional prosperity and creating jobs. The fund will be administered by Kānoa, which is part of MB, and they're the existing agency that's responsible for the Provincial Growth Fund projects and the projects that were supported under the previous Labor government. In terms of the fund, it's primarily a capital fund, so it's very much focused on equity and loans. So the government is looking for repayment of the funds over the long term, and for those funds to potentially be recycled back into other opportunities and stuff like that. There will be some grant funding, but it's for very limited sort of cases, and I think there'll be a fair bit of discretion in terms of the minister, but the first priority will be equity or loans in terms of opportunities. The fund is now open, and some funding has already been allocated, and we can talk about that sort of later on. But it is a 3-year fund, so they'll be looking at opportunities to allocate those funds over that 3-year period, and so it's not a rush in because we'll miss it. There actually is a process to make sure that this is allocated properly and that the investments are made to projects that are actually ready to proceed and will deliver on the outcomes of the fund. In terms of decision making, so there's quite a few different levels in terms of decision making. The lower level sort of allocation would be made by the Kānoa sort of MB team in terms of the officers or staff. The main decision-making group is the Regional Development Ministerial Group, and that's made up of 5 ministers. So you've got Minister of Finance, Minister of Infrastructure, Minister of Local Government, Minister of Maori Development, and Minister for Regional Development. They'll be making sort of the key decisions up to $35 billion, and anything over that would then go to Cabinet for decision-making. The key minister in terms of this fund is the Regional Development Minister, so Shane Jones, and this is a key, I suppose, project in his portfolio. In terms of the size of the applications, they have to be over $1 million. So they won't be looking at anything under $1 million. So in terms of Kanoa, so Kanoa is part of MBIE. They've been around since the Provincial Growth Fund, which was a couple of governments before. We have an existing relationship with the principal advisor that looks after the Manawatu Kapiti area. At the moment, he is working through the Manawatu Whanganui Summit process, which will be happening at the end of September, and looking at deals in terms of that area, and is keen to engage with Kapiti and Kapiti opportunities as well. We have a good relationship with him. He's very open in terms of discussions, and again is providing a lot of information about the policy and the process as it's being developed. The Economic Development Kotahitanga Board is a key connection point for Kanoa. They're there to help in terms of confirming where the local priorities are in conjunction with council, and also making sure that there is endorsement for projects at a local level. So there will be as we'll talk about later on, a process of how we collectively work together with the Economic Development Kotahitanga Board, but also with wider partners and stakeholders to make sure it's a really good joined up process. Kanoa will be the key contact point for the Growth Summit. So it is a ministerial-led summit, but it's a real opportunity for us to tell our story and our priorities. So there's a series of 15 growth summits that will be taking place across the country over the next sort of 6 to 8 months. Ministers will be attending these events. They see them as really key events to understand the opportunities in the areas, but also understand what are the regional priorities. So they want to make sure that these are not being driven by central government, that they understand what's important locally and actually talking to people locally. The Kapiti Summit is tentatively booked for February, and that's mainly to fit in with the diaries of the ministers that want to attend the summit. So Minister Jones and Minister Peters have both indicated that they want to be at the summit. They're keen to be here and keen to be involved. And we're sort of, the early indicators were about 40 to 50 attendees. I'm aware that the Manawatu one is already over 200 attendees. So again, things keep on changing, and so we'll be keeping everyone informed in terms of what the summit looks like, and making sure that summit is actually a useful summit to really have a good conversation about what's important locally and stuff like that. So there'll be more information shared on that as we receive it. In terms of projects that would be eligible, so there's two key focus areas. So it's enabling infrastructure. So this is infrastructure that supports the region to be well connected and productive, and that it provides multiple benefits in the community. The other focus is on resiliency, and so making sure that there is infrastructure in place should be flood protection and weather event protection, water supply resiliency, energy security, food security, and just general resiliency of infrastructure. There's two key initial focus areas, so flood resiliency, and there's been, I think, about $200 million allocated to projects across the country for flood resiliency. Some of that has gone to Greater Wellington Regional Council, and it includes at least one project in Kapiti, and we can send through more information about that. There's also a focus on Māori economic development opportunities as well. In terms of projects that are not eligible, so anything that's already funded through existing government programs, so things like housing, schools, hospital, those sorts of existing sort of funding sort of mechanisms are not eligible. Anything that's all part of the, I suppose, the the ongoing operations, so marketing, business development, business cases, all those sorts of things, again, not eligible. Training or vocational education, and anything that is sort of normal council business in the water space. So anything around sort of potable water, wastewater, or stormwater, except for where it's a sort of a community-owned asset or not business as usual. Still trying to get more clarity about what some of these things actually do look like, because it feels at times they can be a bit contradictory in terms of what's eligible and what's not. I think the Kānoa team themselves are still working through fine-tuning those sorts of things. But anything that would be normally funded through normal government activity or council activity, they don't see that's the purpose of the fund. The fund's there to provide support for projects that wouldn't normally get funded. It's where there is a need for government involvement and support in terms of projects. Yeah. And I think that'll become part of the conversation that needs to happen in terms of, well, what gaps does this mean, or where are there projects that, need government support to actually make them happen, that are part of council's business, but we just don't have the funding in place to support them, sort of thing. So more work to be done in terms of what ticks the box and what doesn't tick the box, sort of thing. The other thing is projects already underway. So things that are already underway, they are not funding, and land purchases as well, sort of thing. If you own the land and you say that's part of your equity contribution to the project, I think that's okay. But if you're using the funding to buy the land, that's not the intention of it. In terms of who's eligible, so basically it's focused on the provincial areas of New Zealand. Kapiti is eligible for the fund. Auckland, Wellington and Christchurch are not eligible. And when we say Wellington, that includes Lower Hutt, Upper Hutt and Porua as not being eligible. Applicants need to be a New Zealand-based legal entity, but you can partner with offshore companies as well. So as long as part of the funding is going to a New Zealand-based entity, that is okay. And it can be to iwi, businesses, trust and council can apply for funding also. In terms of the applicant criteria, so a key thing is the ability to deliver on the projects. I think there were various projects and various other previous funds where funding was approved, but they didn't proceed for various reasons. There must be a co-investment element. So this is not about projects that are fully funded by government. There must be co-investment. The projects must show that they need government support to actually progress or to attract other investment. And they must show alignment to the regional development priorities. So again, this comes back to us being able to tell our story about what's important locally and where our focuses are. If there's an investment to an individual business, it must also show those broader benefits. So it can't just be solely for one business. It must have a broader benefit, and it must focus on one of the areas shown in the list in the below. And so that includes energy security, food security, Māori business, and a variety of other things. So there's a few tick the boxes that need to happen to move it forward. In terms of, I suppose, our proposed next steps, we're really keen to make sure that there is a good joined up process, that we are working with the Economic Development Kotahitanga Board, but also the community and businesses in terms of what the opportunities are in the community or in the district. Keen to have a phased approach that we are aiming to in terms of the summit. So phase one would be making sure we develop a Kapiti growth story and include confirmation of those regional priorities. That we have really good partner and stakeholder coordination and engagement. I think we're concerned about if people sort of go off and just make applications and there's no understanding of that from the council or EDKB, because when Kānoa and other people come to test it with us and nobody knows about it, they'll be thinking, well, is this a priority? You know, where's the support and all those sorts of things. So joined up approach is really important. And then identifying what are the opportunities. We've got an initial list that we're starting to gather, but we need to make sure we identify and actually go through a process of evaluating those opportunities to make sure they meet the criteria, but also to make sure that they actually support, you know, what the region or district is trying to do. The next phase would be focused on supporting those people to submit their application and basically deliver the projects. A key focus for us at the moment is to receive a ministerial invitation to submit applications. There's a couple of different steps you can take to get into the process. A ministerial invitation gives you a bit of a head start and cuts a few of the steps out of the equation. And I think, you know, when you look at the makeup of the panel that'll be making the big decisions, having that ministerial support early on becomes really important. This slide just provides a little bit more context to what those next steps look like. We're just working through sort of the timelines and how we'll do that in a bit more detail at the moment. And what we're keen to do is come back and talk to you in October about that in a bit more detail, and also start that engagement with the other partners and stakeholders through different forums in October as well. Now open to questions.
Great. So there's a little bit more detail on that slide. There's actually quite a lot more detail. Could you go back to that slide, please? Could we have that up? That's great.
Apologies, it's a bit hard to read.
I'll go, I've got a few questions, but I'll go to the Deputy Mayor first.
Well, my question is around the date for the summit. That seems like the key date. Any idea when you'll finalise that? I can see in here you're looking at October for the online hui. Will it be after that first meeting?
Yeah, so the summit date has been basically led by Kānoa or basically the ministers
Right,
at
okay.
the moment. So it's the ability to find time in the ministers' diaries to make them available, but they'll be available. So they're sort of leading the charge on that at the moment, but that'll be part of our discussion with Kānoa to make sure it does work for the community as well.
So the Growth Summit is organised by MB, not by us?
So they will be the main organisers. We'll be there in terms of making sure that the agenda and the story and all those sorts of things and the attendees
Okay,
will be contributing to that part of the summit, but they're the lead on it.
right, okay, cool. Thank you.
Nigel?
I think deeply cynical characterises my broad view of this so far, but can you think of an example that we might apply for funding for? Because I'm kind of stretched to think of one that might fit the criteria.
Some kind of visitors centre?
So one of the I think one of the projects that we have been talking about for a little while, and it's linked to the Economic Development Katahetanga Board, is the shared food manufacturing hub. So the ability to have a joint facility for food and beverage companies to be sharing in terms of food manufacturing. It aligns with a priority focus area for us as a district. It also ticks the box in terms of food security and benefiting multiple businesses, and actually being a really sort of key piece of enabling infrastructure.
Right. Is that something that we would do with Horowhenua, or could do with Horowhenua, given that they consider themselves the food basket of the Lower North Island?
We'll fight over that one. In terms
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
But definitely, you know, we have ongoing discussions with our neighbours to the north, and even talking to people in Pairua and that sort of thing. How can you make sure that this is a, you know, subject to making sure it all works from a feasibility perspective, that is something that would benefit the district, but also have other benefits as well.
Just if I could add, I think that the start of that process could well be the come from Otaki effectively with the regen If you start with regen and start with supply, and that's the whole resilience thing, and then go through to the manufacturer and then distribution, you're shortening the supply lines, but the resilience is there as well. So there's nothing to stop us, bringing together a number of the individual aspects of that and bringing them together as a whole infrastructure project.
And I guess also, so two questions really. One is like, I'm gung ho for applying for grants. Let's knock ourselves out. Applying for money, applying for funds is just applying for more debt. So, what's the cost of how much does this money cost? Does it interest free forever, or what? I mean, the T's and C's will make interesting reading, I think.
Yeah, look, there's a lot more information to be shared. We've had different levels of indications about, potentially there could be an interest-free period and those sorts of things. But again, that would be subject to negotiation, I think, with the agency involved and discussion about actually what's right given different levels of feasibility of projects. Early stages, feasibility is really difficult, cash flow will be difficult. Is it a mixture of debt, equity, and those sorts of things? So those would be part of the negotiations that you would have. Also part of actually when you're doing the due diligence about the projects to put forward, actually what works and what doesn't. If a project is not going to be able to service debt or, support equity, there's no point putting it forward.
And I think there were salutary lessons from the Provincial Growth Fund, which was a former iteration of this, that for a number of councils was disastrous. It actually cost them a lot of money. I would be really concerned if we were getting funding that was more debt funding for nice to have projects, because ultimately it's still debt. But grants by all means. So I guess the devil's sitting somewhere inside those details, but obviously there's a bit more to play out yet, right?
Yeah, I think a big thing is this is not just about council projects. This is about projects for the district. And at the end of the day, there weren't any council projects. Obviously, this is part of a discussion that we all need to have that didn't fit, or the structuring didn't work for council. We would be keen to make sure that the businesses where there is a benefit in terms of this type of debt structure or whatever it is works for, that we're collectively supporting them. To move
I think the point is that you'll be looking at other co-investors as well. So much as the way we discussed what the SPVs look like, it's bringing in those people, and also it's just getting the business case right and understanding what that risk is, and having a stage gate approach to how you work into the infrastructure project.
Yeah, and I just want the last one for me really is so say a project like Whale Song, for instance. Now, presumably they could independently apply, or is it required to get the stamp of approval from a local authority?
So they could apply independently. I think the indicators that we've had is that they probably wouldn't be successful independently, that they would be much better to be joined up with a wider project in terms of that area.
Tourism, you mean?
Yeah, no, probably in terms of the location. So in terms of that location, in terms of the area in the Paraparaumu Town Centre, and what are the wider sort of objectives of that project. Again, it's just about working through to make sure we understand what's the best way to be successful. They do need to have consent though. So anything that's put forward that requires a resource or building consent and those sorts of things, that needs to have happened before they go into the process. So making sure things are ready to tick off in terms of funding being in place, sort of thing.
And sorry, I did have one quick note here, and that is Porirua is not eligible and Hutt's not eligible in Wellington, and yet we are told we are Tier 1. So some of the things that we have to put up with is we have to put up with the intensification, etc., because we're a Tier 1 council. But under this scenario, we're not a Tier 1 council, are we?
No. Like I think this is part of I think there's been a few discussions about we get contradictory sort of, information about what we are and what we aren't, depending on the scenario. So yeah, you can't win. Yeah, and I think where we can benefit from it, let's grab it.
We'll take it for this one.
Yeah.
I think Darren has a comment to make in response to some of that.
Thanks, Your Worship.
Then I'll go to Liz.
I guess what I want to add in this space is, unlike the PGF, we've focused a lot on shovel-ready and council working with partners. If we come out of this with $0, but our community is successful in obtaining either grant funding or loan funding through central government, then that's a real success for us, because it's about us being an enabler, a connector, an influencer, and the facilitator of opportunities. When I first saw this, my initial thought was, right, I'm going to get this to pay for the link road. That was my initial thought, right? And unfortunately, it's not about infrastructure. It's about other things. But if the whale, if the whale song gets funding for this, and we've had a part to play in connecting, that's a massive success for us. So it is similar in I guess who and how it's being administered from what we saw with PGF, but there's probably some learnings that have been taken from PGF, and we're looking at improvement in how we go about facilitating. So it's and it's nice that we're actually included in this one this time, right? And we do take those wins too, Nigel. So I take that point. When you are included in metros, but then when there's opportunities to be rural, we'll take that. Similar to, I think, this conversation we have with health, right? It's we're a bit of a chameleon at times, but if you can change your spots to get good outcomes for us, I'm all up for that.
Liz.
Oh, yeah, a couple of points. Firstly, I don't have a problem with borrowing money to invest, so long as you do your sums on the return on the investment. So debt is not an issue, really. If you're recouping more than what you're outlaying in interest and so on, let's go for it. It's the way to grow. Yep. Couple of other points. One is, what constitutes community support and how do we obtain that? And secondly, does this fund cover OPEX as well as CAPEX?
So I'll answer the last question first. So it's CAPEX.
Just CAPEX?
Yep, so it's CAPEX. In terms of community support, we're definitely keen to make sure there's a good stakeholder and community engagement and partner engagement through this process, that, not only are we talking about the opportunities, but we're talking about the story in terms of Kapiti as a whole and engaging people through that. We would be obviously starting with a more targeted process initially, but then also making sure we keep the community informed and give the community a chance to be involved in that process through the next steps. And obviously the summit is a key point in time in terms of February, but there's ongoing, this is a 3-year fund, so it doesn't stop in February. There's ongoing opportunities for projects and opportunities to be put forward and for engagement to be going on in terms of this space.
So can we just define community? Are we talking key stakeholders or are we talking the public at large?
So we definitely want to make sure that we have good engagement with key stakeholders and those sorts of things with people. But also I think, through the Provincial Growth Fund projects, we saw where there wasn't good community engagement, that there was, not support for those projects sort of thing. So we do need to make sure that the community is part of this process.
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm referring to. We don't want a repeat of, if something is likely to be controversial, let's leave it off the list or find some way to find the support for it.
Yeah.
So, just so long as, someone's paying attention to how we inform the wider community of what's happening. And there's all the, the NIMBY people as well, So we just have to make sure we don't get sidetracked or sideswiped by those kind of people in the community.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Kia ora. Just thinking with the way you were describing things there, Darren, if it's sort of council business or business as usual sort of things, if it's in the LTP and already funded by LTP, does that mean it's not available for this fund? Because I was thinking, Otaki Reservoir number 2, library, many projects come to mind. But if we have already sat down and worked out that we can pay for them, they're not eligible. Is that the way I read it? Is that right?
Yeah, the advice that we've received is that if that's sort of normal council business and there is sort of funding mechanisms in place for it, it wouldn't be eligible. I think there's more work to be done though to explore that and test that. And ultimately, if I think ministers can see benefits in projects, ministers will push those through. So I think this is where the summit becomes really interesting in terms of what's the opportunity to present the opportunities to the minister so that he is encouraging officials to make things happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
And from our point of view, we definitely want things to actually make a return, because one of the things that came to mind from the last triennium particularly was the whole Kapiti Hospital side of things, or a lower level daycare, something of the sort, which is never going to give a financial return, but it has a massive return to the community in terms of health benefits.
I think
I can't quite see how it fits under that, so I don't know whether you could.
I suppose at the moment we're sort of quite an open list of what opportunities could be, and then what we need to do is just filter through the criteria and just sort of say, well, actually what does meet the criteria, but also what works from a financial feasibility sense sort of thing. It may not that it provides a commercial return. It may be that it can service the debt or whatever, or equity works. Again, we would just need to look at opportunities.
I'm sure you could have 1,000,001 ideas thrown at you. Good luck.
There's definitely a few already, sort of thing. Yep.
Yeah, so what I read in the slides is that things like education and health, which are the main things we need, which is infrastructure to grow, actually aren't eligible for this. This is more an economic development fund. That's what I'm reading into this. And I'm presuming that's why Neil's in the room.
There's definitely an economic, a productivity focus in terms of actually lifting productivity. But there's also a resiliency sort of side of things. We know that there's some social infrastructure that doesn't have a funding mechanism. And I think we do need to test some of these things to sort of see, well, would it fit in the mix? And I suppose it's sort of, we're not saying anything's off the table just yet, but the indications are that if there is a clear funding stream that already exists in terms of how this should be funded, it isn't in the mix. But I think we've got some opportunities to test, to sort of say, well, it may not be a hospital, but it might be an enhanced primary, secondary care facility that has a private element to it, sort of
Or a
thing.
well-being hub.
Yeah, sort of. there's some things I think that we can sort of be testing to sort of say, well, does this sort of, tick this box, but, doesn't cross out that box, sort of thing.
Yeah. There's a bit of work to be done there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Yeah, good luck. Glenn?
Just have a couple of questions. One in terms of process. So are you thinking that you'll bring like a little task force together and identify projects yourself? For example, reaching out to Whale Song, just because it's already been mentioned, might be something else. Or are you going to run like a Dragon's Den where people come in and present and then you filter it down? What's the process, the council process? And then a secondary question is, are we thinking we're going to have 5 projects, we're going to hang our hat on one outstanding candidate and go for broke? What's your thinking?
In terms of the exact process, I suppose that's something that we're keen to come back and talk to council about, but also working with the Economic Development Kotahitanga Board on as well. We don't have all the ideas. You know, we do need to be engaging with the community and making sure we understand what are the opportunities out there, but we will need to have some process of filtering those to make sure that we understand, you know, one, do they meet the criteria? Are there ones that have more priority in terms of delivering district-wide outcomes? And how we make sure that we can do that in a fair and open way, sort of thing. So that would be part of an ongoing engagement that we would be having with different stakeholders, you know, the idea owners, the opportunity holders, and making sure that is a very constructive, engaging process, sort of thing. So, you know, what we're looking to do is come back to council in October and just talk about that process in some more detail and make sure that we talk about different decision-making points and just how we can work together in a collective way forward. Sort of thing. And in terms of number, again, there may be some prioritisation. I don't know if we would say there's only one opportunity with two opportunities. We may sort of say, hey, these are the focus projects, and we want to make sure we really tell that story during the summit or whatever. It will just be about assessing that and going through that process.
So we're expecting the summit to be the Dragon's Den to the ministers, and then they'll make the decision after the summit. Is that?
So the summit will be an opportunity for engagement with ministers to present ideas to them. And what we've heard is that something that would come out of those would be ministerial invitations for projects that they want to see be put through the process.
That is sort of, okay. And in terms of, just want to get my head around it needs to return back. So say if it's $1 million, that $1 million has to get paid back, and then that $1 million that's paid back then goes into future projects elsewhere, or that's...
Yeah, so debt, so any debt portion funding would need to be repaid in terms of some form or another over time, sort of thing. In terms of equity, I imagine there would be some structure that would ultimately see that there'd be some return in that equity over time, and I would also imagine that they would want to see that equity paid back over time. So, and it might be that it's equity for a portion of time and then gets turned into debt. That would be part of the negotiations.
So if we look at the example that Neil was given with the food hub cluster network, so if that was a project, so would that would have to pay that cluster, that infrastructure that's built would have to pay back, the entity that runs it would have to pay the money back?
If it was a loan or debt, yes, there would be after some repayment over time, sort of thing. And again, it would come down to what you're able to negotiate. You know, if it could show, you know, like when we talk about the regen, the horticultural side of things, there might be a grant element to that. Given the different partners involved, we would need to structure those up and to see what would be the best way to make it work.
Yep. So if we ran a project, the council, would that sit on our balance sheet and have implications on our debt?
So, yeah, so any debt that the council would have would be normal debt. Yeah.
Can I just add also that there will be co-investors as well, so it's not just council that's going to be the investor.
So for a council project, would we be expecting that we would shoot that off to EDKP and they would be the holder? Is that what we're thinking, or no? We're not thinking.
Look, I suppose it comes down to the project sort of thing. You know, yeah, it's too hard to say who would be owner. Yeah.
Very good questions, and throw a bit of light on what our thinking is at the moment. So Martin has his hands up. Jocelyn did too. Don't know if you still want to ask a question next, Jocelyn, but for now I'll go to Martin.
Good, everyone.
Make a comment. Comments and questions.
You hear me okay?
Not very well, Martin. Maybe unplug your headphones just while you're talking. from previous experience, your device microphone seems to work better.
We still have.
They need to work. Those headphones.
That better?
Yeah, much better, thanks.
That's cool. Yeah, thanks for this, Darren. I appreciate that it's very much at the early stages of this, so it's very, very difficult to say too much about it as such. And I know that we're already building the relationship. But one of my questions is, do you think there's the opportunities, and is this where maybe the SPVs come in that Neil's talking about, that some of these projects could be even bundled up as such, and a joint application done to cover the whole lot? Is that an option potentially as well?
I'll let Neil comment in terms of the SPVs. In terms of bundling up, we definitely think there's an opportunity to bundle some projects together. We think that some projects, if they are submitted by themselves, they won't meet the criteria, and they won't be maybe of size or whatever to make it work. So the best case would be to try and say that these are either a sector or a location bundle, and that would provide the best opportunity of being successful. And so that's really becomes really important that there's good engagement with the project owner and stakeholders to make sure that everyone's on the same page. I'll let Neil talk about SPVs.
Yeah, look, I think the SPV is probably just a bit of a red herring at the moment. I think it's looking just at what does the infrastructure project look like, and it may well be that there is a collaboration that is an SPV, but and can contribute to that as one of the co-investors. But we really need to identify what it is that we're looking at, and just what are the sort of structural considerations in that.
Okay. Obviously, one of the critical things is building that relationship with that principal regional advisor, and I'm under the impression we've already got a good. I mean, I've met with him with Wellsong, and I know council's met with him. We've already got a nice relationship with that fella, haven't we?
Yep. So we know Terence well, and he keeps us informed, and he knows the EDKB well as well.
Yeah, no, it was Terence that gave us the indication that the Wellsong just couldn't stand alone. It needed to be involved in, or needed to be part of an overall infrastructure project.
I think that's caught up now with Wellington Company anyway. It's part of their consent. I'm under the impression, not 100% sure, but I know that they're pushing that wagon as well as Marco would. But again, I hear what you're saying. I'd have expected that would have had to be part of a bundle of some sort, as such. Look, just wanted to flag, we've through the Capital Health Advisory Group, they've got the Polyclinic business case, which they want to have ready, or application for a business case. Would that potentially be a type of project that sort of wouldn't, sort of out of the norm of being funded? And we're not going to get a hospital here anytime soon, but but the Polyclinic could have been as an upgrade option. Do you think that there would be that could be possibly a pathway for this?
So it's definitely one we have on the list to test. It's been raised through the group sort of thing, and Chris has raised it with us as well to put it into the mix, and it's one definitely that would be testing through the process, because in some ways it feels like it doesn't meet the criteria, in other ways it could do. So we need to test it more to see if it can work.
Oh, look, I fully appreciate that. Look, I think it's great that we're in the mix. I think the 30 million we got from the last infrastructure fund would have been a really good practice case. The money you managed to score for Otaki, I've got a lot of confidence that you guys will do a very, very good job of getting what you can for Kapiti. And I agree with the CEO. Our job may end up just being facilitators in this space, but as long as we're getting good benefits for the community, onwards and upwards. So I look forward to seeing how it all goes. But I also take on board what Nigel said as well. Debt is debt. I prefer a grant, but we'll just see how it all goes. But I'm sure whatever we end up with will be done in a very, very positive way. So look forward to the future briefings.
Thanks, Martin. Jocelyn?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Darren, for this and the questions from everyone else. I know people have been talking about specific, ideas. One of the ones that I started thinking about was some of our ecotourism type stuff with, we've had a presentation about the lowland, the low hill trails, and that probably comes under, or maybe comes under the CWB or not, I don't know. So is that eligible, I suppose, my first question? given, I suppose, money's been taken away from CWB at a national level?
We definitely have tourism infrastructure in the mix, and we're definitely keen to understand what would be possible under it. As you're probably aware, there's different ways that trails are funded nationally, sort of thing. So we do need to make sure we understand what potentially could be funded and what couldn't be. So it's a bit like everything else. But also, what could we be doing to add things like some accommodation and all those sorts of things into the mix as well? And is there some smart ways to make sure that we're providing infrastructure to support our ecotourism, but our tourism sector generally as well? And so definitely in the mix at the moment. We don't have enough detail at this stage to know whether it fits or doesn't fit the criteria.
Thank you, because I know I think there was going to be a trust set up in that space, and I'm not sure where that is at this stage. But I suppose if that's something that is in the mix, maybe if it hasn't been set up yet, which I suspect it hasn't been, that's something that probably needs to be looked at. I think.
We can follow up with the team on that.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Nigel?
Yep. Just around the process for this and in terms of what is funded. So they're only funding CapEx, is that right?
That's what we've been advised. Yep.
Yeah. And so if there's no wiggle room for that, and I'll hark back, not trying to make any particular point here beyond the relevance to this, of the Te Urahi. And one of the primary issues with that was you build the building. So the PGF provided the funding, or half the funding, to build the building. I think where it fell over actually was the OPEX, what it was going to cost to operate this thing and keep it going, right? And so that's one of the biggest single dangers with these things. You get the money to build a piece of infrastructure or whatever it happens to be, but then you've got to operate it. And then so the question then becomes who's doing the operating and who's paying the operators. And so that's the note of caution, I guess. And like with Neil, with the food cluster, I just think that has just such a fantastic potential, food and culture and all of the things we desperately need to be promoting in Kapiti. But again, I'm not quite sure that a lot of that is OPEX. There's not a lot I can't see CapEx unless you're going to build a massive big warehouse somewhere. But even then, it's employing all of the staff to operate it and run it and all of those sorts of things. So it's sometimes I think it's just a bit of a be careful what you wish for.
The door of unintended OPEX. Yep.
Well, very good.
I can't remember who coined that one. Lawrence, I
That's a
think.
good one.
Glenn, that's right.
I totally agree with you on that. I think what's this whole
Just get a
process
response from
is
you.
scoping. It's scoping and understanding what it is and what the components are, and then who could be the co-investors and what and for what purpose. So it really is a good process, and each part of it, obviously, there's going to be discussion and poking a stick at it and making sure it's robust. But there is. There's a lot of effort that needs to go into getting to the next stage. It's really just laying out this is a process. It's a really good opportunity, and yeah, even if we miss out in a couple of these, it does give us pathways for future and what else we can do to sort of grow and develop the economy.
The risk that we have a lot of these projects is that government will approve at a point in time. And as the project goes on, there's no doubt there will be variations and cost increases and all those sorts of things. Government doesn't contribute to that. Whoever is the delivery of the project has to wear that extra cost.
And so to add to that, what are the checks and balances? You've got to have a stage gate approach. You've got to get to a certain stage of it, review where you are and decide, is there any changes that are going to happen in the future? What does it look like? What are our options and going forward? So you don't just run along and just the same path. Maybe that's the time you review it and decide on what happens next.
Lawrence?
Just a quick question. I assume the Education Hub is a potential one in this as well?
I think the education aspects of the education do feed into this, and it's really just looking at each again on its own sort of
Yeah.
merits and deciding what that looks like.
Okay.
But it doesn't stand alone.
Okay, cool.
Okay, I'm not seeing any more lights on, so it's a start of a bit of a journey. It seems there have been learnings from the previous similar iteration of this in terms of working with the community earlier, less of a lolly scramble and more of a collaborative approach to projects that might or might not be of value. Also, great to see Neil here and the Kotahitanga Economic Development Board involved early. Just seeing iwi all the way along that list, I would see that projects which work alongside iwi would be very favourably looked upon, particularly looking at the two ministers who are going to visit us. With our hui with the ministers coming after Manawatu, informally getting things that we think might be floating to the top in front of them so that they don't come to us with kind of everything sewn up and the projects that they want. As first in is often best dressed. So just being very aware of that. Will we have, the question is, will we have somebody at the Manawatu hui?
Yes, I managed to score myself an invite. And I thought
Great.
it would be useful to go and see what someone else does and take some learnings from that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think that point. I think that point that Darren raised. I think that point that Darren raised late in the conversation around being really careful of not committing to projects which have the potential of cost runaways and cost increases, because that's going to get more, not less. And so much of the previous funding that came through from central government for the Provincial Growth Fund ended up being returned because the projects became unaffordable. We weren't the only council to go through that across the country. It's just, yeah, it's extraordinary. So, yeah, might not be a free lunch, but it might be a good lunch.
And I think
parting words.
Chris has sort of mentioned before that this is not the only fund that'll be coming through over the coming sort of period. And so again, it's what we can be doing to make sure that we're ready for other opportunities and how this all works together sort of thing. So when we're looking at things like the growth story and stuff like that, we're not just thinking purely for this fund, we're thinking for other opportunities as well.
Absolutely. The work that we do towards this will be beneficial in so many other ways. And those connections that we form along the way as well, and those relationships. So, yeah, all the best. And we'll wrap up. Nobody else got their hand up online? No? We're all good. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, guys. Brilliant.